So Lucario is one of the most iconic Generation 4 Pokemon just from a design standpoint. It was one of those pokes that was announced before Gen 4 even officially came out. It was building a lot of hype because I guess a lot of people were really into it in a strange way. And it got its own movie, and yeah, it was cool, and then it was in Smash, and it was also great in the competitive scene, so it was in many ways one of the quintessential Gen 4 Pokemon all around, right? Along with things like Infernape and Heatran. And it was one of the scariest, arguably the scariest Pokemon, depending on the situation, of course, in the tier for a long time. And I actually have a personal connection to this. I was very much involved with the way it happened. So Lucario, being a feared late game sweeper, was known, from Diamond and Pearl. It didn't come swinging out of the gate with Swords Dance at first. People were like, oh, well, it's got a higher special attack stat, so let's use Choice Specs and Aura Sphere. And then people realized, oh, actually, close combat hits a lot harder, and it's also got Swords Dance and Extreme Speed. So let's do that instead. And then it took off and revolutionized the metagame, all that jazz. And it's always been a great Pokemon, and the way the SD set adapted. The old standard used to be SD Crunch, E-Speed, but then Scarftar and Gengar come around, and they're doing they're dropping a Bullet Punch, and then there's Stone Edge for Bold Zapdos and Impish Gyarados. And eventually, down the line, people even started running Ice Punch for Gliscor and Nidoqueen and also Bold Zapdos. And yeah, with support, you can just make it run through everything because all you really need is SD, CC, E-Speed. So, yeah, it was incredible, and you would set up so consistently because for such a frail Pokemon, it really does have incredible typing. And it's just ruthless because slower Pokemon drop to close combat, faster Pokemon get cut off or knocked off by E-Speed. Not literally knocked off, of course, that would be a bit much. But it's perfect on paper, right? What more could you ask for? And yes, somewhere along the line, it just kind of disappeared. So there was a time where this was never really seriously thought by anyone, but it was kind of a joke, a running joke, that Lucario was actually broken. So post DPP, when it continues to get played in Smogon Tour, then there's still plenty of Lucario action because, hey, I want to win, let's use Lucario. There's plenty of good Lucario teams out there. And in the fall of 2013, I was using a Lucario team I was incredibly fond of. I liked a lot. And I had a battle against a fellow named Marcelo DK. And he ran a stall team. I think it was built by Tamahome. It was Fori, Gyarados, Blissey, Shaman. That's why I think it was Tamahome's, because it had the Shaman, which is usually not a Pokemon you see it on those stall teams. And I remember Tama had one with it, so... yeah, and it took some switching with Stealth Rock, but then my Luke got an SD as Blissey switched out and just cleaned house. And there was some funny stuff where I crit the Fortress with a +2 Life Orb CC, and he was like, oh no, yeah, Impish Fortress with Earthquake, which it definitely wasn't Impish, and it definitely didn't have Earthquake. But even Max Defense Fortress drops to +2 CC, and I posted the calc, and I was happy because that guy was really annoying. And funnily enough, he really took this in a strangely personal way because he started saying that Lucario was actually broken and that was the only reason I was winning, which was pretty funny. But he then started spamming Lucario himself, and he started doing really well in DPP. So this whole thing that Lucario was broken, I mean, nobody actually seriously thought it, but it was more indicative of, yeah, this is a really, really good Pokemon. And there was this other whole thing about once you get up rocks and Mixed Knight starts Draco Meteoring things, and then there's no possible way to avoid a Lucario sweep. Their synergy is just too good. And I mean, they do have extraordinary synergy, but to say nothing of being offensive Pokemon that are good against other offense because of those powerful E-Speeds. But yeah, that was a whole joke. Oh, DPP is a bad metagame because there's too much power, rocks, Mixed Knight, Lucario. It was a whole thing. And shortly after this, there evolved possibly the first instance of DPP getting memed on by players that didn't really play or understand it. In that the joke, I mean, it was a fairly innocuous joke, all things considered. It wasn't like those more tier maligning pieces of nonsense we would go on to hear years later. But the joke was the last Pokemon is always Lucario. Whenever there was an unrevealed Pokemon, people who didn't really know DPP wouldn't know how to figure out that last, so they would just say, oh, it's always Lucario. It's the scariest sweeper. And yeah, Lucario was pretty unchallenged in its status as the scariest sweeper for a long time. And that's why, and it wasn't even a matter of, can you figure out if it's Lucario or not? Even if you don't know it, it's kind of like RBY Tauros, to draw a rather lofty comparison. In that, you can know it's Lucario, but it's still really scary because it's got that speed. It's just good enough, and you're picking off the faster things. And you're wondering, okay, well, this thing is so scary. What happened? Well, some might argue nothing really happened because Lucario is still a great Pokemon, of course. But it definitely has a much more difficult time succeeding now than it did before. And there's a reason why It's Always Last Mon Lucario has not been said seriously in a really long time. Basically what happened is let's say, 2017, 18-ish, Jirachi sets were pretty varied. Yeah, it always comes back to Jirachi. And and it was generally used as a special attacker, roughly as commonly as it was used as a physical attacker. And the physical attacking sets were good, but not spammed on every kind of team. They were mostly just reserved for para-spam stuff, and that was limited in its own way, especially when Nidoqueen T-Spikes is everywhere. Have fun running your Machamp into that. So Lucario was doing great against the balanced teams, because a lot of Iron Head Jirachis that were commonly seen were used on these balanced teams, and slower Spit-F Jirachi is nothing but another Lucario victim at +2. And, if Jirachi is the Scarfer, then you can't Iron Head flinch. Yes, Fire Punch, but you could set up Lucario or threaten CC against an Iron Heading Jirachi because of Inner Focus. That's why it was so great. One reason why it was so great. But then, the optimization of physical Jirachi realizing, hey, this isn't just a para-abuser. I was using it on my stall team a lot, and it's just such a perfect cleaner. There were a couple of other stall teams that were also beginning to utilize this Jirachi's talents. at first it was sub, and then I really liked Protect 3 attack, because with sub you have to be careful with Jirachi's health. With Protect, I said with sub you have to be careful with Jirachi's health. Yeah, right? It's, that was my moment of the day. Anyway, my dinosaur moment. Dinosaur just like Lucario, and remembering its prime. Yeah, so with physical Jirachi becoming more optimized on these teams, both Jirachi being more poised to consistently wreck teams with the support from these stall teams as opposed to LOL just para things, then it's a much more consistent cleaner now, and it also helps these stall teams out because these stall teams really like having that fast cleaner to lock the game down against offense that might bludgeon them. And offensive teams with, big hitting D-Knight, T-Tar, Gyarados, and Lucario. So these kinds of stall teams rose to prominence in the metagame. They really started taking it over to the point where some people really, really didn't like what they did. And it's actually kind of a similar story as to what happened to SD Scizor. But even in its prime, SD Scizor was not the threat that SD Luke was. And as great as it was, and I was one of its biggest fans, SD Luke was a metagame-defining monster. And just truly one of the most iconic, overwhelming threats in the tier. And physical Jirachi, it wasn't just that physical Jirachi was a check to it. Because, Super Rachi was also a check to SD Lucario in pretty much the exact same way. But Super Rachi didn't compete with it in the same way because Super Rachi was not a physical attacker. And, you would see Lucario on all sorts of teams. Offense, bulky offense, balance, semi-stall, stall, however you want to categorize it. Even, semi-stall teams, that was the bread and butter of a lot of those spike-stacking offenses, bulky offenses. Whatever team's genre you want to assign them. Late DPP, it was incredibly popular. Rocks, spikes, clean up with Lucario. Even if it wasn't SD, then it could be agility, or in rare cases, even Scarf. And what happened was that, that when Jirachi is not just checking you, but also competing with you. Because, I mean, plenty of other Pokemon checked Lucario. That didn't really stop it. It's the fact that Jirachi was doing this role very much like Scizor. It was pretty much outdoing Lucario in this role because it was also bringing defensive stability, and it was really consistent in its offensive attack because of its defensive stability. You know, with Luke, as threatening as it is, then sometimes you have those situations where its frailty is just not able to be overcome, and you wind up not doing as much as you would have liked with it. Now, obviously, the flip side is Jirachi wishes it could pack Lucario's power, so depending on the matchup, then there you go. But when you are trying to slow down offensive teams, then obviously Jirachi is going to be the much more consistent choice. And, yeah. Now, Lucario did get second life once people started using Copycat to just ruin opposing stall teams, because you phase in Lucario with Aurora Whirlwind and you have Roxabon on your side of the field, and good night. You are getting phased around until you are done. You know, it happened a million times. There's a very popular replay, I think it was in a Freeze Eye video or something, where, you know, someone roars Lucario in, and then it just clicks Copycat 32 times, and yeah, it doesn't actually sweep the opposing team by Copycat with just Stealth Rock up. This isn't Stealth Rock and Spikes, just rocks. You know, you roar 32 times uncontested, yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of damage. So even hazard-resistant teams are going to struggle because you basically just get so much free damage in so many places that after you're done copycatting 32 times, then you are good to go in terms of cleaning them up. I mean, it's a formality at that point. So, yeah, and even then, Lucario got burned because it was discovered that that's not quite how the mechanic works in-game. The mechanic, I had the visual in my head of, you know, an actual mechanic, you know, like the guy who fixes your car. Or woman who fixes your car, my apologies. But the person who fixes your car, just saying, that's not how you can copycat with Lucario. And for some reason, I visualized this mechanic as Ethan Hawke. Yeah, he's got a very mechanic-like look in his older age. In a good way. Anyway, so, yeah, it turns out that copycatting like that, it doesn't work. It's kind of like, I'm forgetting exactly what the detail is, but I think it's like the way that Choice Sleep Talk works in Gens 3 and 4, where you can only use it once. The first turn you're out in the field. After that, it fails. And yeah. Hang on, I feel a sneeze coming. Excuse me, I'm just allergic to metagames where Lucario isn't good. I hold metagames to a certain standard, which directly corresponds with Lucario's viability in them. That's why Black and White 1 was excellent, because Lucario was really good. Yeah. And, yeah, so then once you find out Copycat, I mean, I thought people overdid it, because Scarf Lucario was actually a great Pokemon without Copycat. It was not just a Copycat machine. And, you know, people were giving a lot of credence to, oh, you know, it revenge kills D-Deer so well and all this other stuff, and it copycats, and then people kind of forgot about all that D-Deer revenge killing and other utility stuff once the copycat mechanic was discovered. I remember I brought Lucario to a tournament game, and people were going, why is he bringing Scarf Lucario? That team is so outdated. It's like, no, Scarf Lucario is a good cleaner. That stab on a Scarfer is amazing. Yeah, and it also, the quadruple Stealth Rock resistance, longevity, wonderful. And my buddy Jirachi even came up with this thing where you run Swords Dance on Scarf Lucario, and you're like, whoa, what's that all about? And basically against a stall team, or even a balanced team, you pivot the Scarf Lucario into a Clefable knockoff, because you're not going to need the Scarf against, you know, a bulky team like that. And suddenly you have an SD Lucario. You know, it's incredible. So this is why when we're talking about the fall, we're not talking about a Pokemon that's, you know, basically UU per current viability standards or usage stats or anything like that. But it is such a far cry from what it used to be, which is, of course, an incredible shame. But it's still a good... I mean, even the standard SD sets, and we're not just talking about the fact that physical Jirachi no longer has a complete stranglehold over the metagame, because it is something you very much have to consider with every team, not just SD Luke teams. But the fact is that, just a simple adaptation of how you want to use it even can yield great results, because, you don't hold it back late game. I mean, hey, a lot of teams aren't super hot on the whole fighting resist thing, so if you can get that SD Luke in early on and poke those holes in their core, and, Gera doesn't like switching in, Lotties and Rotoms aren't the most confident either, you can very easily spin this to your advantage and clean up with something else. So that's a way to do it. I've thought about Choice Band. I think that might be a little much, though. But, yeah, and Scarf is still a great Pokemon. And, yeah, it's worth mentioning that in that tournament game, I used the Scarf Lucario, and it was an old team, and it did still have Copycat. But the hilarious thing was that it actually wound up using Copycat to great effect in the battle. And Copycat was not just for turning the opponent's Roar or Whirlwind against them. It is also great because if you explode with something else, this is a great combo. CB Azelf Explosion, and then you go to Scarf Lucario and Copycat, and you have an Explosion Scarf Lucario. That's taking out full health things that you otherwise never would, like Swampert. So, yeah, it's still got a place on some Scarf Luke sets, I think. And yeah, so Life Orb and SD and Agility, or not Agility, SD and Scarf are still great. I think there's some merit to a 4-attack Life Orb set. If you're thinking, hey, I don't get that much opportunity to SD, maybe I wish I had more coverage. Hey, go for it. CC, E-Speed, Ice Punch, Crunch, that sounds like a great set. And I'm not so much a fan of Agility. I mean, there was a time where Agility was good, like in the Salamence metagame, because you Agility and suddenly you take out Mence and Gliscor with Ice Punch, and Scarf Heatran can't check you with CC anymore, but yeah. I mean, some people also like Specs and Calm Mind, but I think those sets are pretty... are on the gimmicky side, to be sure. But hey, if someone finds a consistent way to use them, then I'm all for it, because I would love to see more Lucario again. So yeah, that is the basic gist of this video. I hope we see more Lucario in the future, because it is a shame how the evil tyrant Jirachi has rendered it a shell of its former self. But yeah, I think it has all the tools. We just have to find the way to explore it again. Hey, I mean, the Iron Headband that I'm trying to manifest into existence might help us get there. But either way, I have hopes that Lucario will be great again. That's not how I wanted to phrase that, but whatever. I'm tired. So, thank you so much for watching / listening, and I will see you in the next one.